The tranquilizer dart slipped from Jake Thompson's weathered hands as he stared at the impossible scene before him. Rex, the 400-pound African lion caught in a steel trap, while 5 lionesses formed a protective circle around their bleeding king. This wasn't supposed to happen on Eleanor Patterson's ranch, not with animal control already circling like vultures with their 48-hour ultimatum. The metallic clang of the dropped dart echoed across the Texas heat as Ellie's voice cracked over the radio. "Jake, tell me Rex isn't caught in that goddamn poacher's trap." Her words hung in the scorching air like a death sentence. The lioness's low growls turned to anguished roars as Rex's massive head lifted, golden eyes finding Jake's with an expression that seemed almost human, almost pleading. "Ma'am," Jake whispered into his radio, sweat mixing with tears he didn't know he was shedding. "We got ourselves a situation that's about to break your heart." How do you save a lion that the whole town wants dead? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Lone Star Safari Ranch stretched across 2,000 acres of Texas hill country like a patchwork quilt of golden grassland and weathered fence posts, each acre holding memories that Ellie Patterson wasn't ready to surrender. At 72, she carried herself with the stubborn grace of a woman who'd buried 2 husbands and raised 3 generations on this unforgiving land. Her silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun that had witnessed oil booms, market crashes, and now the fight of her life. "Money can't buy love, but it sure can protect it," she'd tell anyone who'd listen. Though these days fewer people were listening and more were demanding she surrender the one thing that kept her heart beating: Rex, the African lion who'd been family longer than most humans in Cedar Falls cared to remember. Jake Cowboy Thompson had been watching over both Ellie and her menagerie for 15 years, his weathered face telling stories of Afghanistan deployments and Purple Heart ceremonies that he never talked about. At 65, the former Army sergeant moved with the careful precision of a man who'd seen too much death and refused to witness any more on his watch. His trailer sat at the edge of the property like a guardian's post, close enough to hear trouble but far enough to respect the boundaries between employer and something deeper, something he'd never found the courage to name. The ranch itself had become a sanctuary for the broken and discarded. Rex and his pride of 5 lionesses, Queenie, Duchess, Princess, Lady, and Belle, rescued from roadside zoos and illegal breeding facilities where love was measured in ticket sales and animals were disposable props. Rex's distinctive black mane, now streaked with silver at 8 years old, caught the morning light as he limped across his enclosure, the result of old injuries that Dr. Sarah Mitchell treated with the devotion of someone who understood that healing came in many forms. But Cedar Falls, population 3,400, had grown weary of living next to predators. The town that once celebrated Ellie's oil fortune now whispered about property values and insurance liability, their tolerance eroded by 3 years of legal battles and one terrible afternoon when 8-year-old Marcus Webb climbed a fence and never climbed down. The boy's father, Daniel Webb, had turned grief into a crusade, organizing town halls and petition drives with the single-minded focus of a man who believed that removing Rex would somehow bring his son back. Sheriff Maria Gonzalez found herself caught between law and compassion, enforcing regulations that felt increasingly like death sentences while watching a community tear itself apart over questions that had no clean answers. The morning radio chatter crackled with reports of protesters gathering at the ranch gates, some carrying "Save Rex" signs, others demanding justice for Marcus, their voices growing louder as Friday's deadline approached. In 48 hours, the state would seize Rex unless Ellie voluntarily surrendered him to a sanctuary. But sanctuaries were just prettier words for prisons, and Ellie Patterson had never been one to surrender anything without a fight that would shake the very foundations of what it meant to love something wild. The morning of July 15th began like any other, with Jake making his rounds at 6:30 a.m., checking water levels and fence integrity, while the Texas sun painted the sky in shades of amber and gold. The drought had been merciless this summer, turning the usually green pastures into a patchwork of brown stubble, and the animals had grown restless in the heat. But it was the sound that stopped him cold, not the usual territorial roars or playful growls he'd grown accustomed to, but something desperate, something wrong. Following the distressed calls toward the northeast corner near Cedar Creek, Jake's boots crunched against the dried earth as he approached the source of the commotion. What he found made his blood run cold. Rex, the magnificent 400-pound lion who'd been the heart of their little sanctuary, lay trapped in a vicious leg-hold trap, the rusted steel jaws clamped around his right hind leg like the teeth of some mechanical predator. Blood had pooled in the red dirt beneath him, and his golden eyes held a mixture of pain and confusion that cut Jake deeper than any war wound he'd ever sustained. The 5 lionesses circled their fallen king with the fierce protectiveness of mothers defending their young. Queenie, the alpha female with her distinctive scarred shoulder, positioned herself directly between Rex and Jake's approaching figure, her low growl carrying a warning that needed no translation. Princess and Lady flanked the left side, while Duchess and Belle held the right, their amber eyes tracking every movement with predatory precision. Jake's hands trembled as he reached for his radio, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders like a familiar burden. "Ma'am," he called to Ellie, his voice barely steady, "we got a situation out here. Rex is caught bad, and those girls ain't letting me near him." The silence that followed stretched for eternity before Ellie's voice crackled back, sharp with worry and barely contained fury. "I'm coming. Call Dr. Mitchell. And Jake?" Her pause carried the weight of unspoken fears. "If those animal control buzzards hear about this, they'll use it as an excuse to take him for good." Jake understood. With only 36 hours left on their ultimatum, this trap could be the final nail in Rex's coffin, literally. Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived within 20 minutes, her veterinary kit bouncing in the passenger seat of her dust-covered pickup truck. At 45, she dedicated her life to healing animals that most people considered too dangerous to save, and Rex held a special place in her heart. She'd delivered 2 of the lioness's cubs and watched Rex mourn when they didn't survive their first winter. "This is a Conibear 330, she said, examining the trap from a safe distance. "That's designed for catching bears. Someone wanted to do serious damage." The implications hung in the air like smoke from a wildfire. This wasn't some random poacher's trap. This was deliberate, calculated, and designed to maim or kill. As word spread through Cedar Falls' efficient gossip network, vehicles began arriving at the ranch. Some came out of concern, others out of morbid curiosity. But when Daniel Webb's black Ford pickup appeared on the horizon, Jake knew their problems had just multiplied. Daniel emerged from his truck with the righteous fury of a man who'd been waiting 3 years for this moment. His son, Marcus, had been dead for 36 months, and every sunrise since had been a reminder that Rex was still breathing, while his boy wasn't. "That monster finally got himself caught," he announced to Sheriff Maria Gonzalez, who'd arrived with the reluctant duty of maintaining order. "This is karma, Mrs. Patterson. Divine justice." Ellie's response came swift and sharp as a whip crack. "That monster has more heart than most humans in this town, Daniel Webb. And if you think I'm going to stand here and listen to you celebrate his suffering, you've got another think coming." Her words carried the authority of someone who'd been fighting battles since before most of these people were born. But Jake could see the fear beneath her defiance. Fear that this might be the end of everything they'd built together. The rescue attempt required the precision of a military operation. Dr. Mitchell prepared a modified tranquilizer dose, accounting for Rex's stress levels and blood loss, while Jake retrieved bolt cutters from the ranch office. The lionesses seemed to sense the humans' intent to help, their aggressive posturing shifting to anxious vigilance as the tranquilizer took effect and Rex's massive form began to relax. Working together, Jake and Dr. Mitchell approached the trap with the careful movements of bomb disposal experts. The steel mechanism had been anchored to a massive oak tree with heavy-duty chain, suggesting premeditation that made Jake's stomach turn. As he positioned the bolt cutters, Rex's eyes found his, and for a moment, the old soldier saw something achingly human in that golden gaze. Trust, hope, and a plea for understanding that transcended species. 23 agonizing minutes later, the trap released with a metallic snap that echoed across the grassland like a gunshot. Rex's leg bore the evidence of his ordeal: torn muscle, possible bone fracture, and the beginning of infection that could prove fatal without immediate treatment. But as consciousness returned to the great cat, something extraordinary happened. Instead of retreating from his human rescuers, Rex extended his massive head toward Ellie's outstretched hand, nuzzling against her palm with the gentleness of a house cat seeking comfort. "I'll be damned," Jake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He knows we helped." Dr. Mitchell, despite 20 years of veterinary practice, found herself speechless at witnessing behavior that challenged everything she understood about wild animal psychology. In that moment, as Rex sought solace from the very species that had caused his pain, the lines between wild and domestic, predator and family, seemed to blur beyond recognition. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. Sheriff Gonzalez, under pressure from state authorities and an increasingly hostile crowd, delivered the blow that would change everything. Given Rex's history in this incident, the state was invoking emergency powers. Ellie had 48 hours to voluntarily surrender Rex or face immediate seizure by court order. By Monday afternoon, the Cedar Falls Community Center had transformed into a battlefield of competing emotions and unwavering convictions. The building, which normally hosted bake sales and school board meetings, now overflowed with an unlikely mixture of animal rights activists, local ranchers, concerned parents, and media crews whose satellite trucks lined Main Street like mechanical vultures. The air conditioning struggled against the July heat and the rising tensions as Sheriff Gonzalez called the emergency town hall meeting to order. Daniel Webb took the podium first, his weathered hands gripping the microphone with the desperate intensity of a man who'd been carrying his grief for 3 years. "My son Marcus was 8 years old," he began, his voice steady despite the tears that threatened to fall. 8 years old when he climbed that fence because kids do stupid things. They don't think about consequences. But that animal, he pointed toward the direction of the ranch, that animal didn't hesitate to kill, didn't pause to consider that Marcus was just a curious little boy. How many more children have to die before we admit that some things are too dangerous to keep, no matter how much we love them? The crowd murmured its divided approval and dissent as Town Council member Patricia Ross followed with legal precedents and liability concerns. "This isn't about emotion," she declared, her voice cutting through the humid air like a blade. "It's about responsibility. If Rex kills again, we're all responsible. The town, the county, the state. Insurance companies are already threatening to drop coverage for anyone within a 5-mile radius of that ranch. We can't let sentiment override public safety." State Wildlife Officer Dave Harrison reinforced the legal framework with cold efficiency. "Texas law is unambiguous. Any exotic animal involved in human fatality must be permanently removed from private ownership. Mrs. Patterson has already received more consideration than most cases warrant. The grace period ends Friday at 6 p.m. But when Dr. Sarah Mitchell approached the microphone, her veterinary credentials carried weight that shifted the room's energy. "I performed the necropsy on Marcus Webb," she announced, her words falling like stones into still water. The bite pattern was single and decisive, not the prolonged mauling you'd expect from a predatory attack. The positioning suggests Rex was intercepting a threat to his pride, not hunting. In 20 years of veterinary practice, I've learned that animals, especially intelligent ones like lions, don't kill without reason. Vietnam veteran Bill Murphy, his American Legion cap askew and his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes, stood without invitation. Ellie Patterson has done more for this community than most of us combined. Her late husband's oil wells funded our school, our hospital, our fire department. Sometimes good people have to make hard choices, and sometimes the rest of us need to trust their judgment instead of second-guessing every decision that makes us uncomfortable. Local teacher Mary Rodriguez spoke next, her soft voice carrying the authority of someone who'd brought 3 generations of Cedar Falls children to the ranch for educational visits. For 10 years, my students visited Rex and the Lionesses. Rex was always gentle, always calm around children. He seemed to understand they were fragile. Something was different that day Marcus died. Something we may never fully understand, but something that doesn't erase 8 years of peaceful coexistence. When Ellie finally approached the podium, the room fell into absolute silence. At 72, she moved with the measured dignity of someone who'd survived oil booms and busts, buried 2 husbands, and raised children on unforgiving land. Her silver hair caught the fluorescent lights as she adjusted the microphone, her hands steady despite the weight of the moment. 47 years ago, she began, her voice carrying the cadence of someone accustomed to being heard, my late husband Robert bought this land as a sanctuary, not just for animals but for broken spirits. He said that healing came in many forms, and sometimes the most wounded souls needed the most space to mend. She paused, letting her words settle like dust after a windstorm. Rex came to us broken, just like my son Tommy was broken when he came back from his first deployment overseas. They healed each other in ways that doctors and therapists couldn't manage. When Tommy died in Afghanistan, Rex mourned for 6 months. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't play, just like me. We're all each other has left of Tommy now. Her voice cracked slightly, revealing the vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. You want to take Rex? Then you better bring a coffin for me too, because I'm not living in a world where loving something deeply makes you guilty of a crime. That lion has never hurt anyone who didn't threaten his family first. If we can't trust love and loyalty, even when it comes with claws and fangs, then we've lost something essential about what makes us human. The thunderous applause that followed was interrupted by Jake Thompson's unexpected approach to the microphone. The ranch foreman, known for his taciturn nature and preference for actions over words, cleared his throat nervously as hundreds of eyes focused on his weathered face. I never told nobody this, he began, his drawl thickening with emotion, but I was there the day Marcus Webb died. I saw what happened. The collective gasp that followed seemed to suck all oxygen from the room. Daniel Webb's face went white as Jake continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. That boy wasn't just climbing the fence out of curiosity. He was throwing rocks at the lioness's new cubs, hitting them through the chain link. Those mothers were getting agitated, ready to charge. Rex didn't attack Marcus. He intercepted what would have been a mauling by 5 angry lionesses protecting their babies. Without Rex's quick action, that boy would have suffered far worse. Rex gave him the quickest death possible under impossible circumstances. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel Webb staggered as if physically struck, his worldview crumbling with the revelation that his 3-year crusade might have been based on incomplete understanding. Sheriff Gonzalez gripped her notepad tighter, recognizing that this testimony would change everything about the case. When the town council voted 4-3 to support the state removal order, the decision felt hollow in light of Jake's revelation. But something had shifted in the community's consciousness. Social media began buzzing with #SaveRex hashtags, and by evening, the campaign had attracted national attention. Celebrity animal advocates, veteran support groups, and wildlife conservation organizations rallied to support Ellie's cause. That night, as Ellie sat in her bathroom gathering scattered heart medication pills from the tile floor, she felt the weight of the battle settling into her bones. Her hands shook not just from the pills, but from the recognition that time was running out in more ways than one. When Jake found her there, his own eyes red with exhaustion and worry, she made him promise something that chilled them both to their cores. "If something happens to me," she whispered, gripping his calloused hand with surprising strength, "don't let them take Rex to some concrete cage where he'll die slowly. Promise me." Jake wanted to refuse, to offer false comfort about her health and their chances, but the look in her eyes demanded honesty. "I promise," he said, sealing a pact that would haunt them both in the days to come. The legal machinery ground into motion with the relentless efficiency of a freight train bearing down on everything Ellie Patterson held dear. By Tuesday morning, Dallas attorney Rebecca Stone had established a war room in the ranch's main house, her laptop screen glowing with case precedents and emergency injunctions while her billable hours ticked away at $500 each. The lawsuit she filed claimed Rex qualified as an emotional support animal under the Americans with Disabilities Act, a legal Hail Mary that drew skeptical laughter from state prosecutors, but desperate hope from Ellie's supporters. "We're arguing uncharted territory," Rebecca explained during a strategy session, her designer suit looking incongruous among the rustic ranch furniture. "No court has ever granted emotional support status to a 400-pound African lion, but the law doesn't explicitly prohibit it either. Your documented PTSD from losing Tommy combined with Rex's behavioral history might give us enough foundation to request an emergency hearing." The counter-lawsuit from the state came swift and brutal, claiming public endangerment and citing 17 similar cases across the country where exotic animals had been removed from private ownership. Attorney General's office spokesman Marcus Rodriguez held press conferences describing Ellie as a grieving widow whose judgment has been compromised by trauma, words that cut deeper than any legal brief ever could. Media circus descended on Cedar Falls like locusts on wheat fields. CNN's satellite truck parked next to Fox News, while animal rights organizations set up information booths along Main Street. The Humane Society flew in their top spokesperson, while Born Free USA organized protests outside the state capitol. Counter-protesters from Texans for Public Safety held their own rallies, featuring enlarged photographs of Marcus Webb and statistics about exotic animal attacks nationwide. Financial pressure mounted with each passing hour. Legal fees alone were draining Ellie's accounts at catastrophic rates, while the ranch's monthly operating costs of $15,000 continued regardless of the crisis. When her stepson, Robert Jr., threatened to invoke power of attorney proceedings based on her early-stage dementia diagnosis, Ellie felt the walls closing in from every direction. "He's circling like a buzzard," she told Jake one evening, watching Robert's Mercedes pull away from another welfare check visit, waiting for me to crack so he can swoop in and liquidate everything. The GoFundMe campaign, launched by local supporters, raised over $60,000 in the first 48 hours, but even that seemed inadequate against the mounting costs. Jake contributed his entire monthly Social Security check to Rex's medical expenses, a gesture that moved Ellie to tears and demonstrated the depth of commitment that transcended mere employment. Rex's recovery from the trap injuries proved more complicated than initially hoped. Dr. Mitchell discovered that infection had spread deeper into the muscle tissue, requiring twice-daily antibiotic injections and constant monitoring for signs of sepsis. The great cat's appetite remained poor, and his usual regal bearing had been replaced by a listless melancholy that worried everyone who witnessed it. More troubling still, the 5 lionesses refused to leave Rex's side, creating a protective barrier that complicated treatment and demonstrated the emotional bonds that skeptics claimed were impossible between wild animals. Community protests took on the rhythm of a sustained campaign, with daily vigils outside the ranch gates becoming a fixture of Cedar Falls life. Local businesses split along ideological lines, some offering discounts to Save Rex supporters, others posting signs declaring solidarity with the Webb family. The divisions ran through families, with children arguing with parents and neighbors avoiding each other at the grocery store. During these tense days, Jake found himself reliving memories he'd spent decades trying to forget. Flashbacks came unbidden, triggered by the sight of Rex's trusting eyes or the sound of Ellie humming Tommy's favorite lullaby while changing the lion's bandages. In quiet moments between crises, Jake allowed himself to remember the bond that had formed between Tommy and Rex during those precious years when the boy was home between deployments. Tommy had been 6 when Rex arrived at the ranch as a traumatized cub, rescued from a roadside zoo where abuse had been as regular as feeding time. The young soldier, himself dealing with the invisible wounds of combat, spent countless hours simply sitting near Rex's enclosure, not speaking, just sharing space with another damaged soul. Jake remembered watching from a distance as boy and cub gradually learned to trust again, each healing the other through patient presence and unconditional acceptance. "You and me, we understand each other, don't we, boy?" Tommy had whispered during one of their sessions, his hand extended through the chain-link fence until Rex finally approached and nuzzled his palm. "War makes ghosts of us all, but maybe we don't have to stay haunted forever." Those words, overheard from Jake's hidden vantage point, had crystallized everything the old foreman understood about the miraculous relationship developing before his eyes. The memory of Marcus Webb's death haunted Jake with renewed intensity as he finally revealed the full truth during private conversations with Sheriff Gonzalez and Dr. Mitchell. He'd been checking fence repairs that afternoon when he heard commotion from the lion enclosure. Racing toward the sound, he'd arrived just in time to witness 8-year-old Marcus throwing rocks at the lioness's month-old cubs, the tiny animals crying in distress as stones struck their flanks through the chain link. "Those mother cats were getting ready to charge," Jake explained, his voice thick with the weight of carrying this secret for 3 years. You could see it in their eyes, the way they were positioning themselves. Marcus was backing up but still throwing rocks, and those cubs were squealing like their hearts were breaking. Queenie and Princess were about to launch themselves at that fence, and God help us all, they might have torn right through it in their fury. Rex's intervention had been swift and decisive. The massive male had positioned himself between the agitated lionesses and the fence where Marcus stood, then delivered a single, precise bite when the boy pressed against the chain link for another throw. It wasn't hunting behavior, Jake insisted, his weathered hands trembling as he demonstrated the positioning. It was protective behavior. Rex saved that boy from being torn apart by 5 enraged mothers, even if the saving came at the cost of Marcus's life. This revelation transformed Daniel Webb's crusade from righteous anger into complicated grief. The father who'd spent 3 years demanding justice for his son's murder now faced the possibility that Rex had actually tried to minimize the boy's suffering. During a private meeting with Ellie, mediated by Pastor Williams from Cedar Falls Baptist Church, Daniel broke down completely. "I've hated that lion for 3 years," he sobbed, his tough exterior crumbling like drought-stricken earth. "I've organized rallies and written letters and demanded justice, and all this time he might have been trying to save my boy?" Ellie, despite her own pain, reached across the table to touch Daniel's hand. "We'll never know for certain what was in Rex's mind that day," she said gently. "But I know that Lion has a capacity for love and protection that most people never recognize." Anonymous threats began arriving by phone and email as tensions escalated. Wednesday evening brought a call that chilled Ellie to her bones. "That monster dies tonight, one way or another. We're coming for him." Jake discovered 3 separate sections of ranch fencing cut with wire cutters, suggesting coordinated planning rather than random vandalism. Sheriff Gonzalez increased patrol frequency, but with limited resources and a county spanning hundreds of square miles, protection remained spotty at best. Jake armed himself with his service pistol for the first time since leaving the Army, the familiar weight of the weapon bringing back unwanted memories of night patrols in hostile territory. He established a defensive perimeter around Rex's enclosure, installing motion sensor lights and positioning himself where he could observe all approaches. Sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford. With catnaps in his truck between rounds of security checks, Dr. Mitchell's private consultation with Jake revealed medical complications that threatened to overwhelm their legal victory, even if they achieved it. Rex's leg wound showed signs of deep tissue necrosis that might require amputation to prevent systemic infection. "An amputee lion can't survive in most sanctuary environments," she explained during a hushed conversation outside Ellie's hearing. "The other lions would see weakness and potentially challenge his alpha status. And the stress of transport to a facility equipped for amputation surgery might kill him outright." When Ellie overheard portions of this conversation, her world tilted further toward despair. The woman who'd fought oil companies and federal regulators found herself facing an enemy she couldn't intimidate or outlast: biology itself. In the quiet of her bedroom that night, she stared at photographs of Tommy and Rex playing together, wondering if love was enough when everything else seemed aligned against them. Thursday night evolved into a community-wide vigil that encapsulated all the divisions and passions the crisis had unleashed. Supporters camping outside the ranch gates with battery-powered lanterns and homemade signs created an almost festival atmosphere, with local restaurants donating food and portable restrooms appearing courtesy of sympathetic business owners. Counter-protesters maintained their own vigil for Marcus Webb, holding enlarged photographs of the dead boy and reciting statistics about exotic animal fatalities. Media coverage drew national attention that transformed Cedar Falls into a symbol of larger cultural conflicts about individual rights versus community safety, rural values versus urban regulation, and the fundamental question of whether love could transcend species boundaries. Celebrity endorsements began arriving from animal advocates and military veterans organizations, while death threats against Ellie and Jake increased proportionally with their exposure. Rex's behavior during this crisis period baffled veterinary experts and challenged assumptions about wild animal psychology. Instead of retreating into defensive isolation, the injured lion actively sought comfort from Ellie and Jake, approaching the fence when they appeared and lying near them during treatment sessions. Dr. Mitchell documented behavior that contradicted decades of established research about human-lion interactions. "This goes against everything we understand about wild animal stress responses," she admitted during a live television interview. Rex should be avoiding human contact, especially given his pain levels and the chaos surrounding the ranch. Instead, he's displaying attachment behaviors typically seen only in domesticated animals. Either our understanding of lion psychology is fundamentally flawed, or this particular animal has formed bonds that transcend normal species barriers. Online debate raged between experts who dismissed such behavior as anthropomorphic projection and others who argued that Rex's responses demonstrated emotional intelligence previously unrecognized in wild felines. The controversy added another layer to an already complex situation, with Rex becoming both symbol and scientific curiosity. As Friday's deadline approached with relentless inevitability, Ellie faced the approaching climax with the grim determination of someone who'd already lost too much to surrender without exhausting every possible option. The legal appeals remained pending, community support continued growing, and national attention focused increasingly on their small corner of Texas, where love, law, and loss were about to collide with consequences that would echo far beyond the boundaries of Lone Star Safari Ranch. Friday arrived with the merciless precision of an execution date, the Texas sun rising blood-red through the haze of drought and desperation that had settled over Cedar Falls like a funeral shroud. At exactly 6 o'clock a.m., a convoy of 3 white animal control trucks rumbled through the ranch gates, their diesel engines cutting through the morning stillness with mechanical authority. 12 officers emerged wearing protective gear and carrying tranquilizer equipment that gleamed with clinical efficiency, while a specialized transport cage sat mounted on the lead vehicle like a mobile prison cell waiting for its occupant. Captain James Mitchell, Dr. Sarah Mitchell's younger brother and a man torn between family loyalty and professional duty, approached the ranch house with the reluctant bearing of someone executing orders that violated his personal conscience. "Ma'am," he addressed Ellie with forced formality, his voice carrying the weight of unwanted responsibility, "we don't want any trouble here today, but we have our orders from the state, and the deadline has passed. You have one final opportunity to surrender Rex voluntarily before we proceed with mandatory seizure." Ellie Patterson emerged from her front door like a general preparing for her last battle, her 72-year-old frame draped in her late husband's oil company jacket and her silver hair pulled back with military precision. Jake Thompson flanked her right side, his weathered hands resting near the service pistol he'd hoped never to draw again, while Dr. Sarah Mitchell took position on the left, her veterinary bag clutched like a shield against the inevitable. Behind them, Rex's enclosure hummed with tension as the 5 lionesses sensed the approaching threat, their low growls creating a soundtrack of defiance that echoed across the grassland. "You want Rex?" Ellie's voice carried across the space between them with the authority of someone who'd commanded oil derricks and boardrooms for 5 decades. "You'll have to arrest me first. I'm 72 years old, Captain Mitchell. What are you going to do, taser a grandmother who's never committed a crime in her life?" Her challenge hung in the morning air like smoke from a gunfight, daring the officers to make her words into prophecy. Jake stepped forward, his Purple Heart visible on his worn denim shirt, a reminder that he'd faced worse odds in hostile territory. "She's right, son. You want the cat? You go through both of us. I've been shot at by professionals in 3 different countries, and I'm still standing." A bunch of government boys with tranquilizer guns don't exactly strike fear into this old soldier's heart. Captain Mitchell found himself caught between legal obligation and moral uncertainty, his radio crackling with urgent communications from state supervisors demanding progress reports. The gathering crowd of supporters, now numbering over 200 and growing by the minute, created additional pressure as social media live streams broadcast the confrontation to audiences reaching into the hundreds of thousands. Chants of "Save Rex" competed with counter-chants of "Justice for Marcus" as the community's divisions crystallized into this single, decisive moment. Daniel Webb arrived with a court injunction fresh from Judge Morrison's chambers, the legal document representing 3 years of grief transformed into bureaucratic weapon. "Judge Morrison signed the emergency order 20 minutes ago," he announced, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights and internal conflict. "If you interfere with this seizure, it becomes federal obstruction of justice. Mrs. Patterson, I don't want to see you go to jail, but that animal cannot stay here another day." Attorney Rebecca Stone appeared with her own stack of legal documents, filing emergency appeals and constitutional challenges even as the standoff intensified. "We're challenging this under the Fifth Amendment," she called out to reporters, while simultaneously arguing with state attorneys via conference call. This constitutes seizure of property without due process, and we're prepared to take this to the Supreme Court if necessary." The legal system ground to a temporary halt as competing injunctions and appeals created jurisdictional confusion that left officers uncertain about their authority to proceed. Captain Mitchell found himself consulting with supervisors, attorneys, and judges while precious minutes ticked away and tensions escalated beyond anyone's ability to control. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's examination of Rex during this chaotic interlude revealed a medical crisis that threatened to supersede all legal considerations. "I'm detecting signs of a blood clot forming in his injured leg," she announced with clinical urgency. "If that clot travels to his heart or brain, Rex will die within hours regardless of any court decision. He needs emergency surgery that's only possible at a major zoo facility with specialized equipment." The nearest facility capable of performing such complex surgery was Dallas Zoo, requiring a 4-hour transport that Rex might not survive in his current condition. The irony was devastating. To save Rex's life, Ellie would have to surrender him to the very authorities she'd been fighting, knowing that successful surgery would likely mean permanent captivity in a facility where she'd never see him again. "This is the choice you're forcing on me," Ellie confronted Captain Mitchell with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Watch Rex die here at home, or send him away to live the rest of his life in a concrete cage where every day will be a reminder that love wasn't enough to protect what mattered most." The crowd's energy shifted as word of Rex's medical crisis spread through both camps. Even some of Daniel Webb's supporters found themselves questioning whether forcing a dying animal from his home served any meaningful purpose. The moral landscape that had seemed clear-cut in abstract debate became muddy and complex when confronted with the reality of imminent death. Rex, as if sensing the gravity surrounding him, approached the fence where Ellie stood and performed an action that silenced the entire gathering. Through the chain link, the massive lion placed his enormous paw against Ellie's outstretched hand, pressing gently against her palm while maintaining eye contact that seemed almost human in its intensity. Dr. Mitchell, despite 20 years of veterinary experience, found herself speechless at witnessing behavior that challenged fundamental assumptions about wild animal cognition. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered to the crowd of reporters recording every moment. "It's like he understands what's happening, like he's trying to say goodbye." The image of the elderly woman and the injured lion touching through chain link became an instantly viral photograph that would reshape public opinion about their case. An anonymous phone call to Rebecca Stone's office provided an unexpected lifeline that demonstrated how national attention could mobilize resources beyond local capabilities. "This is Margaret Caldwell from the Caldwell Foundation," the voice explained. "We're prepared to offer $500,000 for immediate helicopter transport to Dallas Zoo, plus a $2 million endowment for Rex's lifetime care, with the legal guarantee that he returns to Mrs. Patterson's ranch if he survives the surgery." The offer came with conditions that revealed the sophisticated nature of the intervention: legal immunity for all parties involved in the transport, veterinary oversight by a team of Rex's choosing, and media access restrictions that would prevent the surgery from becoming a circus. Most importantly, the anonymous donor demanded that Rex return to the ranch regardless of state objections, turning the medical emergency into a vehicle for resolving the larger custody dispute. As the medical helicopter's rotors began beating their approach rhythm across the Texas sky, a new crisis emerged that transformed rescue into potential tragedy. Jake spotted movement along the ranch's perimeter, 3 figures in military-style clothing approaching Rex's enclosure with equipment that looked far more lethal than standard tranquilizer gear. "Ellie, get down!" Jake shouted, his combat instincts engaging as he recognized tactical movement patterns that spoke of military training rather than amateur vigilantism. Those aren't protesters or animal control officers. Someone's here to finish what that trap started. The attackers moved with coordinated precision that suggested professional planning rather than spontaneous violence. As they breached the outer fence line during the chaos of helicopter arrival, their intentions became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't about removing Rex from the community. This was about eliminating him permanently in a way that would make further legal appeals impossible. Rex, despite his injuries and weakness, rose to meet the approaching threat with the magnificent courage that had defined his 8 years as protector of his pride. His roar of challenge echoed across the ranch with such primal power that it momentarily froze everyone present, human and animal alike, in recognition that they were witnessing something beyond ordinary experience. A king preparing for his final battle. The convergence of medical emergency, legal crisis, community division, and imminent violence created a perfect storm that would test every relationship, belief, and assumption that had brought them to this moment. As the helicopter touched down and armed figures advanced on Rex's enclosure, Ellie faced the terrible recognition that her fight to save one lion had unleashed forces that threatened to destroy everything she'd spent a lifetime building. The first tranquilizer dart struck Princess in the shoulder as the 3 masked intruders breached Rex's enclosure with military precision, their movements coordinated like a special operations team executing a predetermined plan. The lioness collapsed mid-stride, her powerful legs folding beneath her as the sedative coursed through her bloodstream. Duchess and Queenie followed within seconds, their protective roars cut short as they crumpled to the dusty ground, leaving Lady and Belle to drag their unconscious pride sisters toward the far corner of the enclosure. Jake's combat instincts, dormant for decades but never truly forgotten, screamed warnings as he recognized the tactical formation advancing on Rex. "Military training," he muttered, his weathered hands reaching for the service pistol he'd prayed never to draw again. "This isn't some random vigilante action. These men know what they're doing, and they came prepared for war." Rex, despite his injured leg and the chaos surrounding him, positioned himself between the approaching threat and his fallen lionesses with the magnificent courage of a king defending his realm. Even weakened by pain and infection, the massive lion summoned a roar that echoed across the ranch with such primal power that it momentarily froze everyone present, protesters, officers, and attackers alike, in recognition that they were witnessing something beyond ordinary experience. "He's protecting them," Jake whispered in amazement, his voice thick with emotion as he watched Rex limp forward to shield his unconscious pride. Even now, even hurt and outnumbered, he's still trying to protect his family. The sight of the injured lion standing guard over his fallen companions struck something deep in the old soldier's heart, reminding him of countless moments when duty had demanded courage beyond reasonable expectation. The lead attacker raised his weapon, not a tranquilizer gun, but something far more lethal, and in that moment, Ellie's worst fears crystallized into terrible clarity. Someone had come to end this crisis permanently, to eliminate Rex in a way that would make all legal appeals and public sympathy irrelevant. The masked figure's voice, muffled but carrying the authority of command, cut through the helicopter noise with chilling finality. "This ends today, one way or another." When the leader pulled away his mask, the revelation hit Ellie like a physical blow that staggered her backward into Jake's supporting arms. Robert Patterson, Jr., her beloved stepson, whom she'd raised from 12 years old after his mother's death, stood before her with hatred blazing in eyes that had once looked to her for comfort and guidance. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have managed, striking at the very foundation of everything she'd believed about family and love. "Bobby?" Ellie's voice broke on the single word, carrying 25 years of maternal devotion and the crushing weight of ultimate disappointment. You're behind all this. The trap, the threats, Marcus Webb's death? Her legs threatened to give way as the scope of his deception became clear, revealing a conspiracy that reached back years rather than days. Robert Jr.'s confession spilled out with the bitter fury of someone who'd been carrying secrets too heavy for his conscience to bear. "I've been waiting 3 years for that monster to give me the excuse I needed," he snarled, his voice distorted by years of resentment and desperation. "Do you have any idea what it's like living in the shadow of your precious animals while real family struggles? I owe $8 million to people who don't accept payment plans, Ellie. This ranch is worth $50 million. Rex is worth exactly nothing." The truth about Marcus Webb's death emerged in fragments that painted Robert Jr. as architect of a tragedy that had torn the community apart. "Poor little Marcus thought he was helping me surprise you with a visit to the lions," he continued, his words cutting through Ellie's heart like shards of glass. "I told him you'd love to see how brave he was, getting close to the big cats. I never expected Rex to actually kill him. I thought the lions would just scare him, maybe rough him up enough to justify having them removed." Jake's rage built like pressure in a boiler as the full scope of Robert Jr.'s manipulation became clear. The young man had orchestrated 3 years of community division, legal battles, and emotional torture for the simple purpose of forcing a ranch sale that would solve his gambling debts. "That boy died because of your greed," Jake growled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen evil in its purest forms. "You used an 8-year-old child as bait in your sick scheme." The confrontation escalated beyond words as Robert Jr.'s accomplices, revealed as professional enforcers hired to collect his gambling debts, advanced on Rex's position with weapons drawn. The plan had been to eliminate Rex and claim self-defense, creating a tragedy that would end all legal appeals and force an immediate ranch sale. But they hadn't counted on Rex's protective instincts or the community's passionate response to his plight. Jake positioned himself between the attackers and Rex, his 65-year-old body moving with the muscle memory of decades-old training as he drew his sidearm. "You want that cat? You go through me first," he declared, his voice steady despite the impossible odds. "I've lost one son to war, and I'll be damned if I lose another family member to greed." The reference to son hung in the air like a confession waiting to be acknowledged, but there was no time for explanations as Robert Jr. raised his pistol with the desperate fury of a man whose schemes had unraveled beyond salvage. "You stupid old fool," he snarled. "Do you think any of this matters when I'm facing a bullet in the head from mob enforcers? That ranch gets sold today, even if I have to kill everyone here to make it happen." Rex, despite his injuries and the tranquilizer effects beginning to take hold, broke free from the restraints that Dr. Mitchell had placed on his injured leg and charged toward Jake's position with magnificent, heartbreaking courage. The great lion understood, with an intelligence that transcended species, that this battle was about protecting family, and Jake had become family in ways that legal documents could never define. The gunshot that followed echoed across the ranch with the finality of thunder, its report silencing birds, protesters, and helicopter rotors in a moment of crystalline horror. Jake threw himself between Robert Jr.'s bullet and Rex, his aged body moving with the reflexes of someone for whom protecting others had become as natural as breathing. The impact spun him around and sent him crashing to the earth in a spreading pool of crimson that soaked into the drought-hardened soil. Rex's anguished roar as Jake fell carried grief and fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The massive lion collapsed beside the wounded man, his great head coming to rest on Jake's legs in a gesture of loyalty and love that brought tears to the eyes of everyone who witnessed it. Even the attacking enforcers paused in recognition that they were seeing something beyond their experience. a bond between species that transcended every assumption they'd held about animals and emotion. Sheriff's deputies arrived with sirens wailing as the helicopter pilot radioed for emergency medical support, transforming the ranch into a scene of controlled chaos as paramedics fought to stabilize Jake's critical injuries. The bullet had damaged his lung and liver, requiring immediate surgery that would determine whether his sacrifice had saved Rex or merely delayed an inevitable tragedy. Ellie cradled Jake's head as paramedics worked, her tears falling onto his weathered face as she whispered words of love and encouragement that came 25 years too late. "Don't you dare leave me, you stubborn old fool," she pleaded, her voice breaking with the weight of unspoken feelings and wasted time. "Not when I've finally found the courage to tell you how much you mean to me." Robert Jr.'s arrest proceeded with the mechanical efficiency of justice finally served, but Ellie found no satisfaction in watching her stepson loaded into a police cruiser. The victory felt hollow when Jake lay bleeding and Rex faced an uncertain future despite their sacrifice. The ranch that had represented safety and sanctuary now felt like a battlefield where love had proven both powerful and fragile against the forces of greed and desperation. As Jake's ambulance disappeared down the dusty road with lights flashing and sirens fading into distance, Rex was loaded into the medical helicopter for transport to Dallas Zoo. The separation of the two beings who had risked everything for each other created a poignant image that would haunt everyone present, proof that some bonds transcend species, circumstance, and even the threat of death itself. The sterile corridors of Cedar Falls General Hospital echoed with the rhythm of Ellie's footsteps as she paced the surgical waiting room for the 7th consecutive hour, her silver hair disheveled and her oil company jacket stained with Jake's blood. The bullet had torn through his lung and nicked his liver, requiring emergency surgery that stretched through the afternoon and into the evening while Ellie maintained a vigil that felt like a death watch. Every time the surgical doors opened, her heart leaped with desperate hope, only to crash when unfamiliar faces emerged instead of Dr. Rodriguez with news about Jake's condition. Dr. Sarah Mitchell found Ellie in the hospital chapel at 2 a.m., kneeling before a simple wooden cross with her weathered hands clasped in prayer for the first time since Tommy's funeral. "Ellie," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been wrestling with professional ethics and personal loyalty for hours. "There's something about Jake you need to know, something he made me promise to tell you if anything ever happened to him." The revelation began with medical records that Dr. Mitchell had discovered while coordinating Jake's emergency care, blood type compatibility tests that had raised questions about family medical history. When Jake had first come to work at the ranch 15 years ago, he'd listed Tommy as an emergency contact despite having no official relationship with the boy, a detail that had always puzzled but never alarmed anyone until now. "I ran a DNA comparison using hair samples from Jake's personal effects and Tommy's military medical records," Dr. Mitchell explained, her hands trembling as she held the laboratory results that would shatter everything Ellie thought she knew about her family. "The probability of paternal relationship is 99.7%. Jake Thompson is Tommy's biological father." The chapel seemed to spin around Ellie as 25 years of carefully guarded secrets crumbled like ancient walls under siege. Her brief affair with Jake during Robert Sr.'s extended business trips to Saudi Arabia had resulted in the pregnancy she'd never acknowledged, the truth she'd buried so deeply that she'd almost convinced herself it wasn't real. Jake's decision to stay at the ranch for 15 years on wages that barely covered his expenses suddenly made devastating sense. He'd been watching over his son from a distance, protecting without claiming, loving without acknowledgement. Letters found in Jake's trailer provided the documentary evidence of a father's heartbreak, pages of correspondence addressed to Tommy but never sent, confessions of love and regret that had accumulated like interest on an unpaid debt. "Son, I watch you every day and want to tell you who I really am, one letter began, the handwriting growing shakier as emotion overcame penmanship. Your mother thinks she's protecting everyone by keeping the secret, and maybe she's right. But when you laugh, I hear my own father's laugh, and when you're hurting, I feel it in my bones like weather changes. Another letter, dated just before Tommy's final deployment, revealed the depth of Jake's anguish. If something happens to you over there, I'll die knowing I never had the courage to call you son. Rex is the last piece of you I'll have left, and I swear on my father's grave that I'll protect him like I should have protected you, openly, proudly, without shame or fear. The truth explained Jake's fierce devotion to Rex, his willingness to risk his life for a lion that most people considered dangerous. Rex hadn't just been Tommy's companion. He'd been the bridge between father and son, the living connection that allowed Jake to express love he'd never been permitted to acknowledge directly. Every hour spent caring for Rex had been an act of paternal devotion, every sacrifice made for the lion's welfare a form of atonement for 25 years of enforced silence. Ellie's confession to the unconscious Jake in the ICU released decades of suppressed emotion in a torrent of tears and whispered apologies. "I knew you suspected," she sobbed, gripping his calloused hand while machines monitored his vital signs with electronic precision. "Why else would you stay all these years for ranch hand wages? I was afraid if I told the truth I'd lose you both. Afraid Robert would leave me, afraid Tommy would hate me for the lie, afraid you'd demand rights I wasn't ready to share." The complications of Jake's surgery emerged gradually as Dr. Rodriguez provided updates that measured progress in millimeters rather than miles. Massive blood loss had triggered organ failure that required multiple transfusions and life support systems that kept him hovering between worlds. The medical team fought for every heartbeat while Ellie kept her own vigil, alternating between rage at Robert Jr.'s betrayal and grief for the wasted years when honesty might have prevented this tragedy. Updates from Dallas Zoo provided the only bright notes in the symphony of crisis surrounding Jake's condition. Rex's surgery had been successful, with veterinary surgeons managing to save his leg through a complex procedure that installed titanium plates and synthetic ligaments. But the great lion's recovery was complicated by severe depression that manifested as refusal to eat and withdrawal from social interaction with both humans and other animals. "He's grieving," explained Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the zoo's head veterinarian, during a video call that allowed Ellie to see Rex lying motionless in his recovery enclosure. "Big cats can experience emotional trauma that mirrors human depression, and Rex seems to be mourning someone. When we play recordings of your voice, he shows interest, but it's not enough to motivate eating or engagement." The video call became an experiment in interspecies communication as Ellie sang Tommy's favorite lullaby through the tablet screen, her voice carrying across the digital divide to reach Rex in his sterile recovery room. The response was immediate and profound. Rex lifted his massive head, approached the screen with obvious recognition, and began eating for the first time since arriving at the zoo. The veterinary staff stood amazed at witnessing behavior that challenged their understanding of animal psychology and emotional capacity. Jake's awakening on Monday morning felt like resurrection to Ellie, who'd maintained her bedside vigil through 3 days of uncertainty and medical complications. His first words, spoken through the mechanical assistance of breathing tubes and monitors, were characteristically focused on others. "How's Rex?" The question carried the weight of everything unsaid between them, every sacrifice made and truth withheld over 15 years of careful distance. "Alive, thanks to you," Ellie replied, her voice thick with tears and gratitude. "Just like his father." The words hung between them like a bridge finally built across decades of separation. an acknowledgement that transformed their relationship from employer-employee to something deeper and more complex. Jake's eyes filled with tears as the truth he'd carried alone for so long was finally spoken aloud, validation of the love he'd never been permitted to claim. Legal proceedings against Robert Jr. unfolded with the relentless efficiency of federal justice as investigators uncovered a conspiracy that reached far beyond simple greed. Wire fraud charges for insurance schemes he'd orchestrated over several years, attempted murder charges for Jake's shooting, and conspiracy charges related to Marcus Webb's death created a legal avalanche that would bury him in federal prison for decades. The RICO investigation into his gambling connections revealed organized crime tentacles that stretched from Las Vegas to Texas, making him a valuable witness in exchange for a plea bargain that guaranteed life imprisonment without parole. Community response to the truth about Marcus Webb's death created seismic shifts in public opinion that transformed Rex from controversial predator to victim of human manipulation. Daniel Webb's public statement, delivered with the broken dignity of a father discovering his son's death had been orchestrated, carried profound emotional weight. "I've spent 3 years hating the wrong being. Rex tried to save my son from a situation that should never have existed. My anger belongs with Robert Patterson Jr., not with an animal who was defending his family." The town council's unanimous vote to support Rex's return represented complete reversal of their previous position, while the $2.3 million raised through crowdfunding campaigns provided financial security for the ranch's continued operation as a sanctuary. State Wildlife Commission approval for permanent sanctuary status meant that Rex could return home without fear of future legal challenges, his status protected by the same laws that had once threatened his life. The reunion of the Lionesses at Dallas Zoo created veterinary history as documented proof of emotional bonds that skeptics had long dismissed as anthropomorphic projection. When Queenie, Duchess, Princess, Lady, and Belle were transported to Dallas for temporary housing, their immediate improvement in Rex's condition provided undeniable evidence of family connections that transcended species boundaries. The Pride's reunion became a teaching moment for veterinary students and animal behaviorists worldwide. Jake's proposal to Ellie from his hospital bed carried the weight of 25 years of unspoken love and the urgency of someone who'd faced mortality and chosen truth over safety. The simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother represented continuity across generations, a promise that love could survive secrets, betrayal, and even bullets when it was finally given voice. "Will you marry an old fool who's loved you since before he knew what love was?" he asked, his voice strengthened by honesty and hope. Ellie's acceptance came through tears of joy and relief that washed away decades of careful control and emotional restraint. "Yes, but only if you promise to argue with me for at least another 20 years, she replied, sealing a pact that transformed employer and employee into partners in every sense that mattered. 3 months later, the modified livestock trailer that pulled through the gates of Lone Star Safari Ranch carried more than just a recovering lion. It transported hope, redemption, and the promise that some stories deserve happy endings despite the cruelty that threatens to destroy them. Rex emerged into the October sunshine with a pronounced limp from his prosthetic leg developed by Texas A&M's veterinary program. But his golden eyes held the alert intelligence of a king returning to reclaim his rightful throne. The first steps he took on home soil in 3 months resonated across the ranch like a declaration that love, patience, and stubborn determination could indeed triumph over hatred and greed. The Lionesses' reaction to Rex's homecoming provided a masterclass in family loyalty that brought tears to the eyes of everyone who witnessed it. Queenie approached first, her scarred shoulder testament to countless battles fought in defense of their pride, sniffing cautiously at the titanium and carbon fiber that had replaced damaged bone and muscle. Her acceptance came in the form of a gentle nuzzle against Rex's mane, followed by the soft chuff that lions use to express contentment and welcome. Duchess, Princess, Lady, and Belle took turns greeting their returned leader, each touching him with the careful tenderness of family members, assuring themselves that their loved one had truly come home. Rex's answering roar echoed across the Texas hill country with such profound joy that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, announcing to every creature within miles that the king had returned to his domain. Jake Thompson, walking with a cane but fully recovered from his injuries, stood arm in arm with his new wife Eleanor as they watched their extended family reunion unfold with the satisfaction of people who'd fought impossible odds and somehow managed to win. "Look at that, Mrs. Thompson," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion as he watched Rex settle among his lionesses with obvious relief and happiness. "Even with 3 legs, he's still the king of this place." Ellie squeezed his arm, her wedding ring catching the afternoon sunlight as she marveled at how much their lives had changed since that terrible morning when everything had seemed lost. "Just like his stubborn grandfather," she replied, using the term of endearment that had become their private acknowledgement of the complex family bonds that transcended species and conventional understanding. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's routine examination of Rex revealed an unexpected surprise that transformed their homecoming celebration into something approaching miraculous. "Ellie, Jake," she called from the lion enclosure, her voice carrying excitement that made both humans hurry despite Jake's mobility limitations. "Rex isn't the only one coming home today. Queenie is pregnant, and from what I can determine, the cubs are due sometime in December." The news that Rex would become a father struck everyone present as profound validation that life continues despite tragedy, that hope can emerge from the darkest circumstances when love provides the foundation for new beginnings. Tommy's spirit seemed to hover over the announcement like a blessing, his memory preserved not just in the lions he'd loved, but in the future generations they would create together. Community celebration of Rex's return demonstrated how completely public opinion had shifted following the revelations about Robert Jr.'s conspiracy and Marcus Webb's true cause of death. Cedar Falls declared the first annual Rex Appreciation Day, complete with a parade down Main Street featuring floats depicting the lions' rescue and recovery. Daniel Webb, the man who'd spent 3 years demanding Rex's removal, presented a symbolic key to the city during a ceremony that brought the entire community together in acknowledgement of shared humanity and the power of forgiveness. "This cat taught me that sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to protect the living," Daniel said during his presentation speech, his voice carrying the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd learned to transform grief into grace. "My son Marcus loved animals, and I believe he would have wanted Rex to live and thrive rather than pay the price for one man's greed and manipulation." The ranch's reorganization as an educational sanctuary created new purpose from old pain, transforming a private hobby into a public resource that would benefit generations of visitors and students. School field trips resumed with enhanced safety protocols that satisfied even the most cautious parents, while research partnerships with Texas A&M's veterinary program advanced understanding of human-animal bonding that could inform conservation efforts worldwide. Rex's role as ambassador for ethical exotic animal care demonstrated that love and respect could coexist with appropriate caution and professional management. Evening routines at the ranch took on the comfortable rhythm of family life as Jake and Ellie established their new normal as husband and wife, partners in both marriage and the mission that had brought them together. Sitting on the front porch as the Texas sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, they watched Rex play with his lionesses while planning for the future that had seemed impossible just months before. "You know, Ellie," Jake reflected one evening, his weathered hands intertwined with hers as they observed their extended family, "I spent 25 years thinking I wasn't good enough to be Tommy's father, thinking I didn't deserve to claim him as my son because of the circumstances of his birth." His voice carried the peace of someone who'd finally made peace with his past and found the courage to embrace his truth. "Now I realize I was always his dad in every way that mattered," he continued, his eyes soft with the memory of countless moments when love had transcended legal definitions and social expectations. Just like Rex was always family, even when people couldn't understand what that meant. Blood doesn't make family, showing up does. Being there when it matters does. Fighting for each other does. Ellie's response carried the accumulated wisdom of 72 years of living, loving, and learning, that happiness comes not from avoiding pain, but from choosing love despite the risks it carries. "Love isn't about blood or papers or what people think is right," she said, her voice carrying across the evening air like a benediction. "It's about showing up every day, especially when it's hard. Rex taught us that. Tommy taught us that. And you taught me that patience and persistence can overcome almost any obstacle when they're rooted in genuine caring." As if sensing the conversation about love and family, Rex approached the porch and placed his massive head against the fence near where Jake and Ellie sat, his soft chuff of contentment providing the perfect punctuation to their reflections. "He knows," Jake whispered, his voice filled with wonder at the intelligence and emotional capacity that continued to surprise him after all these years. "Somehow, he knows we're all family now, and that families protect each other no matter what." Christmas morning brought rare snow to the Texas hill country, dusting the ranch in pristine white that transformed the familiar landscape into something approaching magical. Rex played gently with 3 newborn cubs, whose arrival on December 23rd had provided the perfect capstone to a year of trials and triumphs. Jake and Ellie exchanged gifts while the Lionesses watched protectively over their newest family members, and community members gathered for the holiday celebration that had become an annual tradition at the sanctuary. The new sign at the ranch entrance told their story in simple words that carried profound meaning. "Patterson Thompson Family Sanctuary, where love has no species." Beneath it, a smaller plaque honored the memory of Tommy Patterson and Marcus Webb, children whose brief lives had taught lasting lessons about the complexity of love, the danger of hatred, and the possibility of redemption when people choose understanding over fear. As Ellie watched Rex teaching his cubs to hunt grasshoppers in the snow, while Jake documented their play with the camera Tommy had left behind, she understood that some stories don't end. They transform into new beginnings that honor the past while embracing the future with open hearts and boundless hope. Sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't between people, they're between hearts that recognize each other across impossible odds. When 72-year-old Ellie faced losing Rex, the lion who'd been her last connection to her son Tommy, killed in Afghanistan, she discovered that family isn't defined by blood or species, but by showing up when it matters most. Jake, who'd loved both Ellie and Tommy from the shadows for 25 years, finally found the courage to claim his truth when a bullet meant for Rex nearly took his life instead. Their story reminds us that it's never too late for second chances, that love deferred isn't love denied, and that the families we choose can heal wounds we thought would never stop bleeding. After decades of careful distance and unspoken feelings, Jake and Ellie learned that the greatest tragedy isn't taking risks for love. It's living with the regret of chances never taken. Rex's recovery, Their marriage and the cubs born that Christmas proved that hope has its own timeline, and happiness often arrives wearing work clothes, walking with a limp, and carrying the scars that prove it fought its way home to us. What chances for love or connection have you been afraid to take? Have you ever found family in the most unexpected places? Share your story of unexpected love or second chances in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.